Your Excellency, Mr. Mazrui, when you think about that with regards to the conversation we had a week before Putin decided to invade Ukraine, you told me that you had no indication, as a member of OPEC Plus, that there was any invasion forthcoming. You didn't think you would go in. As you gentlemen have so often said to me, the purpose of OPEC, the purpose of OPEC Plus is to stabilize the market, provide stability. How can you possibly trust a partner who literally destabilized global energy prices by invading Ukraine? Which basically fundamentally took a dig at what you guys are trying to do.
Well, if we mix politics to what we are doing in OPEC, remember in OPEC and OPEC Plus, we had countries in war and they are both partners. We did not take a side. And we're not taking a side today or saying this is right or this is wrong when we are inside that organization. We have one mission and only mission, which is stabilizing the market. So we cannot be politicizing or bringing politics into the organization and having that debate. There are other entities or ministries that are in charge of that. Our aim is to calm the market, trying to come up with volumes as much as possible. And if we are asking anyone to leave, then we are raising the prices. Then we are doing something that is against what the consumers want, what the consumers are crying for in many countries around the world who cannot probably have to afford where the prices could go, are asking us to calm the prices, try to bring more resources. How can we contradict with that objective, which serves the whole world by bringing an affordable sources of energy by squeezing or asking to squeeze some of the partners out? We cannot. I mean, if a country decides unilaterally, or 2 countries or 5 countries, they have all the right to select from which resources they buy. But we cannot decide for all of the countries in the world and say, you cannot buy these barrels. I think that is something that is outside the OPEC. If another organization is deciding that, and we had sanctions on Iran, we had sanctions on Venezuela, and they were respected members, and we did not do anything against them. So we've been there, we have seen crises, we have seen wars, and we stayed at course and we delivered.
Latest news, Saudi Arabia. Headliner, Gulf oil powers seek U.S. security treaty after Yemen strikes. Dated March 30th, 2021. Some Gulf Arab states are pursuing a written agreement with Washington that could primarily provide defense support after an escalation of attacks on fighters in Yemen on the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. The oil exporters are ideally seeking a formal treaty with the United States as they attempt to redraw a decades-old relationship at a time of broad geopolitical upheaval. People familiar with the proposal said, one said that bilateral defense agreements that are expanded and revised over time might be an option. The people pointed to a pact that the United Arab Emirates has with France as a possible model that was revived after a deadly attack on the UAE capital Abu Dhabi by Yemeni fighters from the Iranian-backed Houthi group in January, with Paris deploying Rafale fighter jets to protect United Arab Emirates airspace. The United Arab Emirates is one of the countries seeking the agreement, the people said. Saudi Arabia is also pursuing the guarantees, and the United Arab Emirates has been asking Israel to help push the case, according to people familiar with the decision on both sides. Establishing a new treaty with the United States would require support from 2/3 of the Senate, a challenge of Washington's highly charged political environment. Headliner, Saudi prince rebuked by West, faces dilemma over Russia and China. Dated March 17th, 2022. The United States and Britain are ramping up pressure on Saudi Arabia to pump more oil in joint efforts to isolate Russia while Riyadh has shown little readiness to respond and has revived the threat to ditch dollars in its oil sales to China. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson flew into the world's biggest crude oil exporter on Wednesday, a day after U.S. Security Advisor Brent McGurk arrived with the U.S. delegation. Saudi Arabia and its neighbor, the United Arab Emirates, which are among just a handful of producers with scarce capacity, have snubbed Western calls for more crude to cool red-hot prices and have struck to an OPEC supply pact with Russia and others. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the kingdom's de facto ruler, has faced sharp Western criticism over the 2018 murder of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi, Riyadh's human rights record, and the Yemen war. U.S. President Joe Biden has so far refused to deal directly with the prince, who is widely known as MBS. With U.S.-Saudi relations at a low point, bin Salman has responded by strengthening ties with Russia and China, even though the kingdom still has close security ties with Washington. McGurk and other U.S. officials met with Saudi officials, pressuring them to pump more oil and find a political solution to end the war in Yemen, where Saudi-led forces are battling the Iran-backed Houthi group, two sources said. Source familiar with the discussion told Reuters, "You would be wrong if you think Washington would give up on these two flies." The senior U.S. administration official said McGurk was in the Middle East discussing a wide range of issues, including Yemen, but declined to elaborate. The British Prime Minister, meanwhile, described Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates as key international partners in the effort to wean the world off Russian hydrocarbons and put pressure on Russian President Vladimir Putin after Moscow invaded Ukraine. But Abdullah Halek Abdullah, a prominent Emirati political analyst, said Johnson should not expect much. Boris will go back empty-handed, he wrote on Twitter. The Saudi government did not immediately respond to a Reuters request for comment on the United States and British visits. For now, Saudi Arabia has shown no sign of abandoning an oil pact supply forged between the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries and allies, including Russia, which has seen the group known as OPEC hiking oil output only gradually. At the last OPEC meeting on March 2nd, less than a week after Russia invaded Ukraine, and as the West ratcheted up sanctions on Moscow, ministers dodged the Ukraine issue in talks and swiftly agreed to stick on existing policy. Meanwhile, Riyadh has signaled it wants closer ties with Beijing by inviting Chinese President Xi Jinping to visit this year. The Wall Street Journal said Saudi Arabia was in talks to price some crude it sells to China in yuan. If Saudi Arabia does that, it will change the dynamics of the Forex market, said a source with knowledge on the matter, adding that such a move, which the source said Beijing had long requested and now Riyadh threatened as far back as 2018, might prompt other buyers to follow. The Saudi Energy Ministry declined to comment, while state oil giant Saudi Aramco did not respond to a request for comment. One diplomat said Riyadh was turning to old threats to push back at the West, although the diplomat and others say any shift to the yuan would face practical challenges. Given crude is priced in dollars, the Saudi riyal is pegged to the greenback, and the yuan does not boast the same role as a reserve currency. Cameron Young, a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, said it would be reckless given global oil pricing in dollars and a currency peg, not to mention the amount of Saudi debt priced in dollars, its reserve assets in dollars, and their holdings of U.S. equities. There may be some context in yuan between Saudi Arabia and China, but there is no reorientation of Saudi monetary policy. The Saudi central bank had assets worth $492 billion at the end of January, including $119 billion in U.S. treasuries. The government had foreign currency debt, mostly in dollars, for $101 billion at the end of 2021, while the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund held $56 billion in U.S. equities. Monica Malik, chief economist at Abu Dhabi Commercial Bank, since Saudi Arabia could slowly shift some sales to yuan. A gradual shift would have a limited impact, she said. And even as U.S. officials were meeting in Riyadh, the U.S. State Department said on Tuesday that Washington was not asking its allies to choose between the United States and China. That's the latest news. And now my thoughts. In regards to the security treaty, the United States itself has itself to blame. The United States continues to send military armaments to the country that is partly responsible, or how you want to look at the events of September 11, 2001, of the attacks in New York City and Washington on September 11, 2001, as well as the continued subjugation and murder of the Yemeni population while they're fighting the Houthis, as well as the murder of U.S. journalist Jamal Khashoggi. And I think to pressure Saudi Arabia, one of the Biden memorandums, the executive order made in December of 2021, was the release of unredacted or unclassified files relating to the Pent Bomb and Operation Encore, an FBI investigation into Saudi financing of the September 11th attackers, just 2 weeks ago, in which we now have written documentation that there were Saudi princes with Saudi government companies that were funding intermediaries in California to two 9/11 hijackers in Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. Now, with the latest of what's going on, with the United States trying to pressure Saudi Arabia to export more oil to combat the financial disparity between Russia's economic sanctions and the United States importing sanctions, which has nothing to do with one another. The United States government are basically siphoning funds of the American taxpayer. It is pressuring Saudi Arabia, saying that we can release more documentation about your involvement with September 11, 2001. This is what this is. Which means, in essence, the United States are holding back information, documentation about foreign countries' involvement with September 11, 2001. Now, just imagine what they have on Israel. These are allies, alleged allies. And here we are protecting them. These are countries which don't need U.S. protection. But the United States is every bit as immoral as Saudi Arabia and Israel. And when I talk about the countries, I'm talking about the governments, not the people. The threat of Saudi Arabia going to China and trading in yuan, which is the currency, it would have a very minimal effect on the US dollar. In fact, Saudi Arabia has hundreds of billions of dollars invested in US Treasury bonds. The last time we saw Saudi Arabia basically threaten the United States to export more oil was during the oil strike in the 1980s. And In 1988, Saudi Arabia created the company, Saudi Arabian Oil Company. And basically, for the first time, Saudi Arabia realized that they could hurt the US economy greatly if they held back on the production of oil. The United States knows this, and they know this quite well, which is the reason why we acquiesce to them. There is no other reason. We don't share any commonality with a country that is built upon the principles of Wahhabism, which is antithetical to Islam. Their culture, their religion, almost everything about them is opposite to the United States. So the only commonality we have is a vested interest in oil and money, US dollars. When it comes to Yemen, well, according to Houthi military spokesman Yahya Saraya, last Friday, he said that they would be announcing details of a wide operation deep in Saudi Arabia. Now, this is a terrible disposition for Yemen because the United States is not acting in good faith. They're the ones who are lending, or I'm sorry, that's a terrible word to use. They are giving weapons to the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars in weapons aid, something that Biden said he would not acquiesce to Saudi Arabia to during his run for president. But one of the first mandates he made, in fact, in the first 3 weeks as president, Biden gave a huge military aid package which was in November of 2021, $650 million, which was the sale of air-to-air missiles in Saudi Arabia, in which even the Pentagon would say that the proposed sale would support U.S. foreign policy and national security of the United States by helping to improve the security of a friendly country. I mean, really, this is what the government thinks of the United States. This is what the government thinks of its people. They don't care about you. Here we have a country that is directly now, with the latest declassified files, involved with September 11th of 2001, the terrorist attacks. And here they are continuing to say that they are a friendly country. And of course, the United States is only looking out for their vested interests. So where's Israel in all this? Well, Israel is trying to play mediator in the Ukraine crisis. The United States basically facilitated that conflict with the CIA, like they did in Afghanistan in 1980, by training and arming the neo-Nazi militias who helped to overthrow Ukrainian President Viktor Yushchenko in 2014 during the Revolution of Dignity, in which Yushchenko was forced out of the country, forced out as president, an interim government backed by the West then produced an overwhelming unanimous vote of 314 to nothing to implement an interim government, which was later replaced by Western puppet Zelensky. And if you can't see what's happening right now in Europe, in the Middle East, if you can't look at it with an investigative eye, by the time the United States becomes victimized by its own decisions, You won't even know what hit you in the face. This is the time to start paying attention. Stop watching Will Smith slap Chris Rock and stop watching these dumb reality shows and start paying attention to the things that matter before you become victims, and then it won't matter.